Prison is a place where, in some instances, friendships are formed that last a lifetime. During the late 1960s, John Gotti was serving a federal sentence at Lewisburg for hijacking. And while there, he met a neighborhood guy named Anthony Rampino, who was nicknamed Roach, and was incarcerated for heroin possession. Rampino had the misfortune of being a user as well as a seller of the drug. His arrest for the sale of heroin dates back to 1962 and would continue up until 1987. Gotti took a liking to Rampino and invited him to the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club that had relocated to Ozone Park, Queens, from its former location on Fulton and Rockaway Avenue in East New York, Brooklyn. Naturally, his invitation came with the stipulation that Rampino had to clean his act up and give up his heroin use. At the time, Gotti was an associate of Carmine Fatico, nicknamed Charlie Wagons, as well as Charlie Wagner, and was a Gambino captain. We know that Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero would do some time in the mid-70s for the murder of James McBratney, and that John's brother Gene would get inducted first. But after Gotti's release in July of 1977, he also became a member of the Gambino family. Over time, Gotti would not only take over Charlie Wagon's crew, but become the boss of the family. And Tony Roach was by his side as a trusted associate. John Gotti would use both Rampino and Willie Boy Johnson, two intimidating-looking guys, to collect the VIG from loan shark customers, and more than likely, never had a problem collecting Gotti's money. During this time, the crew at the Bergen Hunt Fish Club was quickly becoming one of the family's more powerful crews, involved in hijackings, loan sharking, gambling, and drug dealing, among other rackets. Tragedy would strike the Gotti family. On March 18, 1980, Gotti's 12-year-old son Frank was struck by a car while riding a mini bike. The driver of the car was a neighbor of Gotti named John Favara. On July 28, 1980, while Gotti and his wife vacationed in Florida, John Favara was shot, beaten, and abducted in a parking lot near his job. Allegedly, Rampino took part in the abduction and was the person who hit Favara with the bat, although some witnesses described it as a 2x4. Other accounts have another member of the abduction crew hitting Favara. FBI informant William Batista told the FBI a week after the incident, word at the Bergen is that the individual responsible for the child's death was recently killed at Gotti's direction, and Gotti wanted a solid alibi of not being in New York at the time this killing took place. The FBI would piece together what actually took place on the day that Favara disappeared from information provided by multiple informants. 8 members of the Gotti crew used a blue van and 2 cars. After Favara was abducted, he was dismembered, and one account had his remains being placed in a barrel of cement and dumped in the ocean. Information from another informant had Favara being dissolved in acid by Gotti crew member Charles Caniglia. According to government witnesses, Caniglia told Gambino associates that he disposed of Favara's body by placing it in a barrel of acid. By the early 80s, the Gotti crew became deeply involved in the drug business. This time period was a troublesome one for the Gotti crew. The family's boss, Paul Castellano, had John Gotti and his crew under the microscope because of the suspected drug dealing. And it all came to a head on December 16, 1985, when a hit team killed Castellano and his underboss Tommy Bellotti outside of Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. According to a witness, Angel Rodriguez, who would testify for the government and who worked in a photo processing store not far from Sparks, he heard gunfire that sounded like the 4th of July. He also said that he seen a man who he called the Skeleton, who appeared and hid a gun in his coat and walked away after the shooting. He described this person by saying his eyes were big, with pale skin, sunken cheeks, and pushed back black hair. It's been confirmed that Rampino was a backup shooter that day. I recently spoke about federal prosecutor Diane Giacalone indicting members of the Gotti crew that included Rampino in a 1985 racketeering case that involved gambling, extortion, robbery, trafficking cigarettes, and murder. Rampino was released on a $500,000 bond, and during a hearing in 1986, Giacalone tried to have Rampino's bail revoked, or to have his bail stipulations changed. The court agreed to amend Rampino's bail stipulations, stating that he had to report 2 times weekly to the probation department, as well as undergo urinalysis and comply with drug treatment. On March 13, 1987, a federal jury acquitted all the defendants in the case. I'll quickly speak about what I personally know about Tony Roach. I've been in his company a few times. There were some nights where my friends and I would be driving home from a night out, and it would be about 2, 3 in the morning. And on occasion, we would be passing 101st Avenue, where the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club was located. And we'd see a tall figure leaning up against a lamppost, smoking a cigarette. And that was Roach. I always found it funny that he favored Chuck Taylor sneakers. I know he had 2 sons, and I believe one was born missing an arm or a leg. I don't really remember, but everyone called him Happy. There was an incident that took place at the Cross Bay movie theater. Roach was wearing a sweatshirt and had his hood up, and a woman sitting in front of us with her daughter at one point turned around, and she looked like she seen a ghost. She got up with her daughter and changed seats. It never even fazed Roach, and he just kept watching the movie. One day during the feast on 101st Avenue, I was talking to Roach near a truck that sold beer when Gambino member Tony Pep had walked over, and I met him a few times at my family's restaurant, Bravo Sergio, in Manhattan. As soon as he seen me, he showed me a scar on his head and told me that my grandfather gave him that scar. The incident he was referring to happened before I was born. And Roach said to him, "What has that got to do with him?" I was a little surprised because Tony Pep was a friend, a made member, and Roach was not. And Tony Pep said something to the effect of, "It has nothing to do with him. I was just trying to tell him that his grandfather's a tough son of a bitch." While I was doing my time in Fishkill, a guy I knew came from a facility called Wendy, and he was there with Roach. The guy said my name came up, and they spoke about me. Well, when the guy was put on the draft for a transfer, and Roach found out the guy was going to Fishkill, he told him to send me his regards, which the guy did. The guy also told me that some of the guys in Wendy were talking behind Roach's back, which we'll get to shortly. 3 months after Rampino was acquitted, a guy named Philip Paradiso introduced him to an undercover cop looking to purchase heroin. Paradiso is the brother of Mickey Boy Paradiso, as well as a longtime informant who even gave information and taped his brother Mickey Boy speaking about a 1978 murder. Subsequent to the introduction, on June 28, 1987, Rampino was arrested for trying to sell the undercover heroin, specifically 4 ounces worth $30,000. According to the police and FBI, Rampino immediately implicated himself in the 1985 Castellano hit and offered to wear a wire if they let him go. Rampino's lawyer claimed that the cops and FBI threatened his client and wanted him to testify against John Gotti, even using drugs to entice him, knowing that he was a former addict. The lawyer also stated that Rampino never offered to cooperate, which I believe, because had he offered, they would have used him. At the time, the government was putting another case together against Gotti. Rampino wound up getting 25 to life for sale of controlled substance, which was an A1 felony. Naturally, due to articles stating that Rampino allegedly offered to cooperate, inmates started gossiping and labeling him, which was happening while he was in Wendy, as I mentioned. Please remember to like this video if you haven't already. Also, for anyone who wants to show their appreciation, as well as help keep this podcast going, you can do so by either the Super Thanks icon down below or the PayPal and Cash App links in the video's description. In January 2005, Rampino filed an appeal seeking a sentence reduction under the Drug Law Reform Act, where state legislators were reducing A1 felony drug charges. That appeal was denied. Anthony Rampino died while in custody at St. Luke's Hospital in New Hartford, New York, on December 20th, 2010. He had a variety of health issues, including cancer, heart disease, and hepatitis C.